The first note came out wrong. That was the detail Reginald Pemberton carried with him for years afterward, through all the versions of the story he told and then stopped telling. Not the playing, not the moment he finally understood who was crouching on his floor. The first note, flat, strangled by rust, landing in the air of his shop like something that had no right to be there. He was behind the counter when it happened. He didn't react. But we'll get to that. Denmark Street, London, November 27, 1967. The rain had been going since morning, the kind without drama, just gray persistence. Reginald Pemberton opened his shop at 9, turned the sign, and put the kettle on. He was 41 and had been in this business since he was 22. First as a repairman, then as a buyer, then as whatever he was now. The word he used was curator. Denmark Street had 30-odd music shops. Most of them sold to students and amateurs. Guitars with chipped headstocks, drum kits in cardboard boxes. Pemberton's vintage instruments was different. The lights were low. Nothing had a price tag unless you already knew what you were looking at. He had a 1958 Gibson Les Paul Standard Sunburst behind his counter, worth more than most men on that street made in a year. A collector from Geneva was coming Thursday. He was a careful man. He could read a person in 40 seconds. The way they held a neck, whether they touched the strings or kept their hands at their sides. He'd been doing it for nearly 20 years and he was very rarely wrong. The bell above the door rang at 2:30. The man who walked in wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled down to his eyebrows, a purple velvet coat over a white ruffle shirt. 4 rings on his fingers, one of them turquoise and heavy. Cuban-heeled boots, damp from the street. He was young, mid-20s, and he came through the door with a kind of quiet hesitation, the way someone moves when they're not sure of their welcome. Reg read him in about 4 seconds and went back to his ledger. The clothes said musician. The uncertainty said he drifted in from one of the cheaper shops further down the street. He'd look around and leave. They usually did. The man moved slowly through the shop. He slowed in front of things and moved on. Didn't ask prices. Didn't pull out a notebook. At one point, he crouched in front of a display case and looked at the instruments the way you look at something you recognize. Not searching for information, just seeing it. That made Reg watch a little more closely. But then the man moved toward the Les Paul, and Reg came around the counter. That's a 1958 Standard Sunburst. He positioned himself between the man and the guitar, smoothly, from habit. Original PAF humbuckers. One previous owner, never toured, stored properly for 6 years. It's in extraordinary condition. What does it sound like? Warm, long sustain on the upper register. A pause. It's priced at £800. The man nodded slowly and said nothing. Instruments at this level aren't really available for walk-in viewing, Reg continued, his tone helpful but clear. For something in this range, I'd need a prior appointment and some confirmation of funds. It's just how we manage these things responsibly. What he meant was, I don't think this is your bracket. That's fine, the man said, no edge to it. I understand. He turned away from the Les Paul. Reg watched him, expecting the slow drift toward the door. The man turned the wrong way. He went toward the back corridor. The front of the shop was the shop. Clean lines, good light. Guitars that meant something. The back was different. A low ceiling, a single bulb, shelving units with 2 decades of dents in them. That's where Reg kept consignments. Instruments taken in on trade just to close other deals. A warped Telecaster, a pair of acoustics with cracked tops, and on the bottom shelf, half hidden behind an empty cardboard box, a 1954 Fender Stratocaster. The finish had faded from sunburst to almost nothing. 3 of the strings were missing. The remaining 3 were the color of old pipes. A price was written in pencil on a strip of masking tape stuck to the body. £18. It had been there for 7 weeks. The man crouched down and picked it up. Sir? Reg appeared in the doorway. That's a consignment piece. Collection window closes end of the week. It's going into a job lot. The man turned the guitar over and pressed his thumb against the frets, one at a time, slowly. He tilted the neck toward the bulb. Who set these frets? Reg blinked. I beg your pardon? The ends. The man's finger moved along the edge of the fretboard. Someone filed these individually by hand. You can feel it. Reg said nothing because he genuinely didn't know. He had taken the guitar in without looking at it properly. The man who'd brought it had filled out the form, and Reg had written 18 pounds on a strip of tape without testing the instrument or asking a single question. He'd looked at the man's worn coat in the scuffed heels of his shoes, and he had known, or thought he had known, everything that mattered. He had not asked about the frets. He hadn't asked about anything. Before we get to what happened in that room next, if you've found this channel and you've never subscribed, we're still very small and just finding our feet. A subscribe from your phone takes about 5 seconds, and it's the only way the next story reaches you. The man carried the Stratocaster to the front of the shop. He found the practice amplifier on the low shelf, a Selmer treble and bass, the kind every Denmark street shop kept around. He set it on the floor, crouched beside it, found a cable, plugged the guitar in. He turned the volume to 3. He tuned the remaining strings as well as they'd tune, tilting his head, listening to intervals that weren't quite right and probably weren't going to be. Reg stood near the counter with his arms folded. He didn't stop him. He wasn't entirely sure why. The guitar was in no shape to play. Anyone could see that. 3 strings all rusted, the action high enough that you'd need to press almost to the wood to get anything clean out of it. It was going to sound terrible. It did. The first note came out flat and rough, with a buzz underneath it that bounced off the low ceiling. Reg's jaw tightened. Then the second note came, and underneath the rust, underneath the wrong pitch and the buzzing string, something else started to move. This is the part that's difficult to put into words without sounding like you're reaching. The guitar still sounded bad. The intonation was off, 2 of the positions were barely notes at all, but the man's fingers were doing something with the spaces. He was playing the gaps between the sounds, pressing and releasing with a touch so controlled it seemed separate from the instrument in his hands, as if the music already existed, and he was simply drawing it through, using this broken thing as a channel. He was playing The Wind Cries Mary. Reg knew the song. It had been on the radio since April. He'd heard it drifting from shop windows, from car radios, from the flats above the street. He knew the melody. He had never heard it sound like this. The bell above the door rang. Reg didn't look up. The man who entered wore a corduroy jacket with the collar turned up against the rain. Gray hair, mid-50s, hands that were wider than his wrists. The hands of someone who had spent a long time doing small, precise work. He stepped inside and stopped. His eyes went to the guitar. His name was Arthur Doyle. He had brought that Stratocaster in 7 weeks ago, filled out Reggie's form, and walked home with 40 pounds borrowed against it. Through the 1950s, he had set up guitars for session recording in London, dressing frets, adjusting neck angles, doing the slow, careful work that made instruments play the way they were built to play. When the session scene shifted in the early 60s and the new bands brought their own technicians, Arthur's work dried up and then stopped. 5 months of unpaid workshop rent, a loan application denied. He'd come to the shop either to take the Stratocaster back or to watch it go. He hadn't decided yet. He stood just inside the door and didn't move. The final verse of the song moved slowly. Long pauses between phrases, pauses that felt chosen rather than empty. The man's wrist turned on the last bend, pulling the note upward and holding it, and then the string went quiet. The amp hummed softly. Nobody spoke. Reg's arms had come unfolded at some point. He didn't know when. He was holding the counter with one hand, steadying himself without knowing he was doing it. He turned to look at the shelf behind the register, where he kept current magazines. The November issue of Melody Maker was open on page 4, the way it had been since he'd come in that morning. He looked at the photograph on page 4. He looked at the man on his floor. He looked at the photograph again. The hat, the rings, the face, the same face. The man stood up and set the guitar on the counter. He reached into his coat pocket and placed something next to the masking tape price tag. A card. He didn't make anything of it, just set it down and stepped back. The card read, James M. Hendrix. Reggie's hand tightened on the counter edge. He had read this man in 4 seconds. He had placed himself between him and the Les Paul. He had explained about appointments and confirmation of funds in a tone he'd sharpened over years of practice. He had stood in the doorway of the back corridor and told him the guitar wasn't worth fixing. The color left Reg's face slowly, and then all at once. Jimmy turned to Arthur. "You filed these frets." Arthur met his eyes. "I did. 1954, before the session work picked up. I used to do all my own instruments first." He paused. "I carved something into each one as well, on the back of the headstock." Jimmy turned the guitar over. On the back of the headstock, cut by hand with something narrow and patient, a small hawk, wings open, just beginning to rise. Jimmy's finger stopped on it. He stayed like that for a moment. "I'd like to buy this," he said, "if that's all right with you." Arthur's mouth opened. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I need someone who works the way these frets were worked," Jimmy said. "I've got sessions and shows through February. My tech is good, but he moves fast. I need slow and right." His voice was level, unhurried. "This isn't something I'm offering to be kind. I need the work done." Reg stood behind his counter, and he looked at the 18-pound guitar on the wood, and he looked at the Les Paul on the wall with its documents and its Thursday appointment and its 800 pounds, and something moved across his face that didn't have a clean name. "He came in," Reg said quietly, to no one in particular. "He filled out the form. I gave him 40 pounds and wrote a price on a piece of tape." He stopped. I didn't ask what he'd built, didn't ask what he knew. He picked up the melody maker and set it back down. "I looked at the coat," he said. "That was all I did." Jimmy picked up his hat, settled it on his head. He looked at Reg, and there was nothing unkind in his expression. No satisfaction in it, no anger. Just nothing, which was somehow the hardest thing to hold. He held out his hand to Arthur. Arthur took it. Jimi Hendrix played 31 shows between December 1967 and February 1968. Arthur Doyle worked on the guitars before 11 of them, setting neck angles, dressing frets, adjusting action in a rented room across the city. The way he had always worked. The musicians noticed. Jimmy always noticed. In September 1970, Jimmy died in London, a few streets from Denmark Street. Arthur closed his workshop for a week. When he came back, he put the 1954 Stratocaster on a shelf above his bench and left it there. Over the years, when younger craftsmen came to learn from him, he would sometimes reach up and hold it by the neck. Not to tell the story, just to hold it. He died in 1989. His son runs the workshop now. The Stratocaster is still on the shelf. The masking tape is still on the body. 18 pounds. On the back of the headstock, a hawk with its wings open. If you've ever kept working at something when no one was looking, leave something in the comments. Even just a word. It helps more than you'd think.